Sleepless Kai is immersed in one of his midnight writing sessions when a girl appears walking along the driveway in front of his house. It is not the first time he had seen this girl, and he is mesmerized. Kai is a young man living in a small, green town who's about to finish school. Dreams about a faraway place where he'll be accepted and understood, and where his innate personal worth will be appreciated cross his mind every morning while riding to school. The girl named Grace, who's been cutting into his writing session, however, seems to be having a completely different kind of morning. Screaming conflict is a customary way to start a day for her. Sam, Kai's good friend, drives a milk distributing car. One morning, he and Kai stop by their friend Mexie's house, assure his mother that they are going to a library to study for their exams, and of course, go somewhere completely different. For Mexie, the day progresses the most dreadfully. First, he realizes that his friends are soon going to move from this town. Then, reactively, and as a half-joke, he throws a mathematics textbook at Sam and sees it fly away from a rooftop, coming down into the street. The boys come up to a small commotion and notice a man sitting on the sidewalk, being helped by many individuals. His head is broken, and Mexie's textbook is lying beside him. The boys laugh, and Mexie joins in, but he has nothing to laugh about. His name is on the murder weapon. A few hours later at school, Kai stays after class to have a conversation with his literature teacher, Mr. Jackson. The young man seems to appreciate him and trust him, so he often sends over his short stories to him. This time, Mr. Jackson notices that Kai tends to write about what other people like to talk about. The advice he gives him is to let the world immerse him in terrible experiences, and then to write about them. Kai wants to speak with Grace afterwards, but before a proper conversation can begin, they are interrupted by a school bully named Kenner. He seems to be having a quite passionate relationship with the girl Kai likes. The exams begin then, and the mathematical operations in his brain are nudged away by imaginary scenarios involving Grace. To see her with Kenner afterwards is a bitter comeback to reality. During lunchtime, a plan is put together to carry out a prank on the school, a kind of prank that has never been documented in history. Deciding to start their preparations early, they steal forks from school in the hope that they will come up with a more detailed plan later. Something legendary is coming. Mexie, Kai, and Sam then go over to the latter's place so that Sam can change into another outfit for a party. There is one simple problem, however. Everybody except Sam is boiled in. Fortunately, Sam's stepfather, who's a policeman, is out of the house once everybody gets there. While Kai and Mexie immerse themselves in one of the most important deceiving sessions with Sam's mother, their friend goes up into his room and removes the facade from his face. Behind the mask, he seems to be struggling a lot. When Kai escapes the danger downstairs, he sees Sam having a strong emotional breakdown in his room and decides to go back downstairs slowly and quietly. There, he encounters the most unusual picture. Mexie and Sam's mother are smoking together in the kitchen. Suddenly, Sam's stepfather comes home, and all three must force themselves, with the power of the entire universe, to appear sober. Kai doesn't remember Mr. Jackson's advice when life's terrible experience comes to him that night during the party. He unexpectedly sees Grace some strong substance in a toilet upstairs. When he walks away quickly and embarrassed, the girl runs after him. But before she can catch up to Kai, Kenner appears in front of her. Grace isn't honest with him. The reason she chooses to be with him is tough to conceive of. Sam finds his friend sitting alone with an extremely gloomy face in the next scene. He tries to cheer him up, but the unsuccessful attempts make him so angry that he soon finds himself joining him in his gloom. The mask of having fun is torn off, and he admits how afraid he is of getting stuck here. Compared to Kai, he has much lower chances of leaving this place. The future seems bleak to him, and he's afraid. This is exactly why they must make this summer as magnificent as it can possibly be. Sitting in a pond of grief isn't going to fix anything. Kai's mind is somewhat changed by Sam's emotional explosion. He knows his best friend is right, so returning to the party, he decides to fix his problem. Looking for Grace, he finds her in a room with Kenner. Even though Kai can clearly hear the voices coming from the room, he stealthily opens the door ever so slightly and is frozen in place by the sight. It takes a few seconds for the boy to tear himself away from the door, but then he hears a different kind of noise coming from the back. It has elements of fear and powerlessness to it, and it belongs to Grace. Reactively, Kai dashes into the room, thinking that Kenner is hurting her. He pushes him away from her and is beaten in a fight that follows. When the young man wakes up the next morning, he suddenly notices a hand on his hip. As his heart rate rises, he rolls around and sees the girl he loves, opening her eyes. After a moment of thinking that it was only a dream, Kai apologizes for the last night. Grace accepts it, sits up, puts on her skirt, and steps away from him. She seems to be gravitated by the sense of safety that Kai brings, while she's also attracted by the sense of danger Kenner holds. The young man is extremely confused. So as a response to the mentioned events, original thoughts begin to appear in the writer's brain. The things he will put on paper that day will speak of honesty and melancholy. He spends the entire 24 hours alone with his bike, and his mother is both relieved and angry once he finally returns home. From the conversation that follows, we learn that Kai's father left 2 years ago. The mother tries her best to make him explain where he's been, but Kai doesn't say a word about it. He seems unable to see the situation from his mother's point of view. The next morning, a number of things happen that set the checklist for what's going to happen soon. After Kai shares with his best friends what happened last night, Kenner, his friends, and Grace appear on the rooftop with them. The traditional back and forth breaks out, but nothing serious happens. Grace sits with Kai and asks him to help her with her English exam. Then she invites everybody to a bonfire party. And even though Kenner isn't very happy about that, he remembers that Megsy's brother used to have a shotgun in his house. He orders Megsy to bring it with him, and the young man is so afraid that he agrees to do so. He rationalizes his decision afterwards, but it's clear that he doesn't want to bring the gun. It is clear that nothing good can come out of it. To conclude the morning, a policeman appears on the rooftop, and the boys scatter around to run away. Fortunately, Kai is coughed at by Sam's stepfather instead of somebody else, and after a fair bit of screaming and scolding, he is let go. That afternoon, Grace comes over to his house, and Kai's mother is delighted to think that her son is moving forward in intimacy. Grace seems to lack a sense of personal space, however. She sits on his bed and picks up his notebook. When it was politely taken away from her, the two set out to begin their revision. Kai's mother comes in with a cup of tea, and after she leaves, Grace gets interested in where his father is. A conversation breaks out now in which Kai expresses that he doesn't blame his father for leaving. He's actually a model for him. The idea that dominates Kai's mind is that we only get one life, and we should spend it doing stuff that seems most pleasing. There is no reason why you would like to live in this town, so there is no reason why you should not leave it the first chance you get. Grace seems to hate this idea. When she is assured that Kai truly believes in his words, she reconsiders spending time with him and leaves. The day passes in writing and writing then. As stags roam the encompassing forests, Kai cycles through, thinking about the facade humankind wears that blocks the meaning of existence. Grace's facade, as well as his, is as strong as a rock. That night, while struggling to sleep, he heard screaming coming from her house. He sees Grace as she is kicked out of the house and goes down to her. In this moment, something seems to be transmitted between them freely, without running into any artificial or cold facade. While embracing one another, they are their true selves. The next morning, after a fair bit of comical struggling, the kids manage to get Megsy's shotgun out of his house. The get-together is relatively peaceful in the late afternoon. While speaking with Grace, Kai learns that she's as afraid of being stuck here as he is. To avoid chill-bringing thoughts of growing up and its implications, they remember their childhood for a while. As they speak, a huge commotion breaks out behind them. Kenner says something about Megsy's brother, and the boy, who has been visibly afraid of him, suddenly gets extremely aggressive. He dashes towards Kenner, who's holding the shotgun, and in a brief back and forth, the shot is fired. For a moment, we thought that something tragic had happened, but thankfully, nobody was hurt. In the next scene, Kai is challenged into a climbing face-off by Kenner, and the young man feels urged to defend his honor in front of Grace. He knows the cliff Kenner just ascended. He used to climb it often when he was a kid, so he's not very nervous. When he approaches the top, however, his legs become weaker, his hold slips, and suddenly he loses balance. Thankfully and unexpectedly, Kenner takes his arm and saves him from getting seriously injured. On the top of the hill, they smoke, and Kai is assured that he doesn't know the side of Kenner he chooses not to show. The latter, however, seems to know Kai really well. With surprising accuracy, he tells him what he thinks of him. In his eyes, Kai thinks he's better than everyone else in this town, and he is right in that thinking. He knows Kai is better than him, but he's also weaker. He wants to run away from this town, but is, at the same time, afraid of leaving because, out there, he won't be better than others. He will lose the belief that keeps his sanity intact. He views himself as a top mind in this town, but in other places, this view won't necessarily hold. The fight between the desired sense of superiority and the fearful call for a better life is the major conflict in Kai that causes immeasurable frustration. Kenner is sure that he will leave, though, while all the others are going to stay, Grace included. Speaking of Grace, Kenner explodes in anger and warns him to stay away from her. Whether it is a genuine joke or not, neither we nor Kai can fully understand. Kai finds himself awakening from anxious dreams that night. Coincidentally, this is exactly the moment Grace returns home. She walks up to her room quietly, and from the window, the young man watches her undress. Kai is sure that Grace isn't aware of being watched, but then he notices the main door to her house that is left open. Thinking that she left it open for him, Kai shares this hypothesis with Sam in the next scene. The friend takes as rational a stance as possible. There might have been a number of other reasons why the door was left open. Even if Kai is sure that she left it deliberately for him, he shouldn't go over. She has a boyfriend, and besides, in 2 days, Kai will finish school and leave this town. And so, Kai is given advice to take it easy. And as we see in the next scene, he's not so eager to take it into consideration. He tries to speak with Grace, but the latter passes him by as if he didn't exist. During lunchtime, the boys announce that more than 500 forks have already been stolen from the kitchen, and more are going to follow. To their surprise, even Kenner expresses an intention to participate in the prank. With his help, the process will be much faster. As the day progresses in the school, Grace suddenly comes up with a scene that causes a variety of uncertain emotions in her heart. She sees Kai being invited on a date by a girl named Emma. She's been eyeing Kai for a long time, so once Kai is left alone, she comes up to him. Kai finds that Grace is suddenly willing to talk to him, but when she asks about Emma, he chooses to turn his back on her. Grace won't be turned down this easily. However, when Kai senses the double signs coming in his way, he turns to her and asks her what she is up to. He even reminds her of Kenner, but suddenly, Grace leans forward and kisses him. Initially, Kai manages to make her stop, but in the next scene, we see them both entering a supply room. After a short, but passionate moment, Grace asks him to come over tonight and opens the door to leave. Uncertainty about what all of this means, however, forces the young man to stop her. Here, to quiet Kai's daughters, Grace assures him that, in her mind, this isn't a mere fling. She is going to break up with Kenner. Kai's life is clearly taking a sharp turn. The act of stealing forks is changing dramatically as well. One of the participants in the prank, who's been hiding his share of forks in his locker, is coughing and cheating, and he is forced to open his locker in front of everybody. The forks come rattling out, and he is taken to the head of school harshly. That night, however, Kenner brings 2 buckets full of fresh forks from the school kitchen. Naturally, he gets interested in what they are going to do with them. As it seems, however, there is no plan at all. They are collecting forks for the sake of collecting them for now. When Kai returns home, he texts Grace, but receives no answer back. He finds himself restless and distracted. Looking over to her house, he notices the door being open again, and, this time, decides to go over. Slowly, he enters the house, calling for Grace quietly, but the place seems abandoned at first glance. Stealthily, the boy starts ascending the stairs, and, at the top, finds to his that the handle of her door is blooded. Awaiting to see some tragic scene, he opens the door slowly and sees Grace sitting on the floor, leaning on her bed. Kai doesn't need much observation to determine what is going on. Blood is coming from Grace's nose, and a credit card lies next to a line on one of the books. Approaching her slowly, Kai joins her and embraces her warmly. He sleeps in her bed that night, and the next morning, he finds her sleepless and awake, staring at nothing in particular. Kai hears her repeating that all of it was a mistake. The young man doesn't understand what exactly she means at first, but soon he is told that Grace wasn't sober during the entire day yesterday. Everything that happened during that period between them is now a mistake for her, and she asks him to leave. Kai tries to initiate a deeper conversation about it, but Grace's request is unshaken. Once the boy steps away, a drop of tears rolls down her eyes. It is clear that events are taking place on a deeper level of her experience that are not readily expressed on the outside. It needs no explanation why Kai is terribly distracted during the exam in the next scene. The exam is in English literature, the subject he knows the best. So when the teacher notices him sitting by his desk, writing nothing, he decides to address this situation. Quietly, he approaches the kid and kneels before him, noticing tears as they build up in his confused and desperate eyes. Mr. Jackson tells him to stand up, then, getting him away from the exam room, gives him the speech he will never forget, watching Kai drain in tears in front of him. The teacher suggests that he finish this miserable session of self-pity. Unless someone's life is at stake, there is no possible justification for his behavior. Whatever's going on in his brain at this moment, he is unable to put the significance of the exam in perspective for his life. To wallow in self-misery and deliberately write nothing isn't worth it. To lose everything he worked for and to let his magnificent talent go with the wind isn't worth whatever is troubling him right now. The creative prowess Kai possesses comes with certain responsibility, and in a few years, he will look back on this moment either in enormous regret or in immeasurable gladness and pride. The creative process has the ability to heal, and Mr. Jackson wants Kai to be a testament to that statement. Kai returns to his desk completely changed. As if his life depended on it, he filled out the papers with rigorous haste and strong intention. After the exam, the teacher and the student are smoking outside together. Kai tells him everything about Grace and acts as if all of it was a complete disaster. It is true that he speaks honestly, but Mr. Jackson chooses to let him look at the situation from a different angle. Disasters are attacks and events that are at least somewhat equivalent to them. Objectively speaking, Kai dashed into the world, did something very badass, got his heart broken, and came up with a story to tell. Additionally, Mr. Jackson emphasizes that Kai's experience isn't necessarily over. He can still endeavor to get her back, but not until he thanks his teacher for urging him to face life with no armor on. Throughout the day that follows, Kai is much more relaxed. Thoughts flow through his consciousness freely and without destruction. The kids are celebrating the nearing end of school at the lake as he watches Kenner and Grace like crocodiles, when suddenly Emma interrupts his thinking. It is clear that this girl likes him. She's smart enough to determine why she was ditched the other day and emphasizes, while smiling, that Grace seems to be spoken for in the moment. Kai laughs anxiously. Once looking into her eyes, he finds himself mesmerized by her blue, and her sense of humor draws him further towards her. They swim away to grab a drink, then fail to notice that their subtle connection doesn't go unnoticed by Grace. Very soon, as the couple speaks more, their connection becomes much stronger. Kai finds himself laughing at her jokes, and her gaze gradually expresses more and more passion. Finally, they kiss one another and decide to go somewhere where nobody can see them. This is when Kai notices a stag for the third time in our story. The animal soon disappears without a trace, as if it were a symbolic hallucinatory vision. In this moment, Kai understands how much of a fool he was when he stood up to this girl. It is when Kai finds himself for the first time, being completely swallowed by passion, that he's suddenly thrown up on the surface by the sight of Kenner with some other girl named Lisa near the place where he and Emma are having sex. Emma doesn't notice them, and Kai decides that it isn't a significant enough reason to stop what they are doing. Soon, however, he hears the voice of Sam screaming for help, and the two have to rush towards the shore. There, unconscious Megsy is taken out of the water after doing his one last backflip. He seems to have hit his head and lost his mind in the water. The kids fall into desperation immediately. Failing to take initiative, the classmates who don't know how to do CPR stand aside for a while. Thankfully, after a few seconds, one of them remembers that they have to clear Megsy's airways, and the boy's life is saved. Despite this dramatic turn of events, the three best friends discuss the party cheerfully that night. Kai even tells them about what Kenner was doing nearby and expresses that he has no intention to tell Grace about it. She already made her choice, and Kai wants nothing to do with her anymore. All the jokes are set aside then, and the boys turn to appreciating each other for existing. The time comes for the larger friend group to finish what they started. After accumulating all the forks in one place, the kids find out, much to their dissatisfaction, that Kenner is also attending the main event of the prank. As we soon learn, something that the school kids call Chapel Dash is going to take place today. It is a prank that is scarcely put together due to its over-the-top magnitude. The group of young men, all but, must dash from the chapel and roam the streets. As we are comically told in the next scene, the school heads are already awaiting such an event. They think that they are prepared for what's going to happen, but they do not know yet that on this particular occasion, Chapel Dash will be conducted with one important addition: thousands of forks. The school security and the kids from the finishing class then immerse themselves in a secret military operation. Forks are arranged in rows in front of the chapel, and all except Mr. Jackson take this night extremely seriously. Consequently, the meadow is dotted with moonlight, reflected by thousands of forks, as the boys cheer each other on and head out. Soon, after a fruitless attempt to catch them, the kids are scattered around. Kai and one of his classmates manage to get to his house, and as Kai sends him upstairs, he encounters his mom in the kitchen. The mother takes his appearance surprisingly well. She urges him to get to his room and prepare for his last exam tomorrow. Two important events happen the next morning. On a more cheerful note, the school heads express their determination to punish each vandal that roamed the streets last night. Another news item is that Grace broke up with Kenner. Watching her be thrown out of his car elicits conflicting feelings in Kai's heart. Still, The boys finish their last exam, and none of them get coughs for what they did last night. So Kai has all the reasons to feel happy. That night, during the bonfire party, however, the young man finds himself constantly looking over to where Grace is standing. Emma notices this, of course, so when her date looks away, she leaves the party to reflect on herself alone. Kai is told about her departure, so not knowing what it is about, he follows her into the woods. Kai wants to like this girl. He knows that she is good to him and that everything about her is extremely attractive. Perhaps this is why he tries and somewhat even manages to lie to himself that she truly likes her. Emma herself, however, won't be fooled this easily. She can see how Kai looks at Grace, and she knows that no matter how strongly Kai insists that he wants her, he wants Grace more. The young man has nothing to say in response to this. As the party progresses, Emma does what's best for her and breaks up with him. Kai finds himself completely alone. He calls Sam, but the boy seems engaged in a kid's activity that he won't terminate for anything. After drinking a little too much, Kai re-engages the party and soon runs into Grace. The girl wants to talk. She wants to tell him things he always wanted to hear, but this time Kai wants her to get out of his life. Intending to leave the party, he walks to the forest road and sees a pair of lights coming in his direction. It seems to be Kenner who's been searching for him. The boy looks terrible, and for some reason, he wants Kai to get in his vehicle. The latter knows better to agree immediately. He can notice a certain degree of insanity in Kenner's expression, but after one aggressive and intimidating emotional outburst, Kai decides that in this moment, it is best to obey and hope for the best. Grace sees them drive away. Gradually, Kai understands that he is in a very dangerous situation. Kenner doesn't seem to be thinking straight after Grace tried to break up with him. He thinks he knows a person with whom Grace cheated on him. Right now, he's taking Kai over to his house, and he has no peaceful intentions. He wants to give him what he deserves. Looking over to his phone quietly, Kai realizes to his terror that his battery is dead. He can call for no help. It almost seems that nothing can prevent some enormous disaster. But suddenly, a stag appears on the road. Kenner fails to react quickly, and they end up crashing on the road. Fire is set on the car, rolled over, and hung backwards from his seat. Kai notices a gun and a knife. Realizing that Kenner was planning to murder him in the woods, he listens to him as he begs to be helped. Overwhelmed by hatred, Kai doesn't answer his pleading. Instead, he gazes at him intently and expresses without a word that he knows what his true intention was. As fire is set on the car, Kai crawls outside and, limping his way, runs away from the terrible scene. Covered in blood, he sits on a meadow as the sun comes up, reflecting on what he did, when he suddenly sees Grace looking at her. Noticing the blood on the side of his face, she sits beside him and puts her head on his shoulder. Speaking no word, they sit together as the police find a piece of Kai's dictionary on the tragedy site. A certain word is circled with a red pen. It is philophobia, the fear of falling in love.